I'm Belle Bear. This is Sacred Mechanics.
Are we entering an age where that kernel of truth or that sense of spirituality and creativity being connected is going to be a point of difference versus the machine?
That is what creativity feels more like to me, that there are the answers internally if you are quiet enough to listen for it.
Welcome, Lisa Wrake, creative director and multi-sensory storyteller. So you've been crafting immersive brand experiences for 20 years, more than 20 years at an experiential agency.
That's right. In some form or another, yes. It sort of morphs this way and back, as is the nature with being a creative. But yeah. It's like me.
So for those out there that aren't sure what an experiential agency is, can you summarize that?
So we create and design experiences for people. And obviously, as a commercial agency, it's usually delivered by a brand. But rather than thinking about a picture or an advert or a design, we're looking at creating human experiences. So something that you would go to, and something will happen at that thing that you go to. And we'll incorporate all of the senses when we do that. So there will be visual stimulation, there will be sonic stimulation, there will be some form of narrative. So we try to bring in all of the different disciplines to tell some form of story. So it's a little bit like theatre, I guess, a little bit like theatre, but without actors. I think with it, it'll be the guests and the people that are obviously the heroes. And we try and weave stories around them. So it's quite a new field, or maybe it's just that it's been described like this more recently. And it's very, it's like the buzzword now. Everybody talks about it. But I think it's been building up this type of commercial creativity, I would say probably for a good 20 years. It's come out of conceptual art from the 90s and earlier, of course. And it's born out of improvements in technology as well that allow us to immerse people in sound and vision more than we've ever done before.
And I guess immersion is the operative word there, where I'm wondering if your audience is becoming more and more desensitized and you almost have to up the stakes.
Yeah.
Because people have a lot of screen time or a lot of, AV time, I suppose. So it must be a really massive creative challenge sometimes to really pull people in and hold them and encapsulate them for a while.
Well, I think that's where it's interesting, because I want to do less with visual stimulation and balance it out with the other senses. So, we are so visually stimulated all the time. And now it's obviously tends to be on quite a small screen. We focus very much on a small screen. It's very individual how we experience media. Even with reading, it's a sort of unique personal experience. I think where this becomes interesting is you can create group experiences, and you can, like I said, you can start to really bring in other and design other elements that tease out other emotions and talk to the other senses. So we might even introduce food, for example. You might use food as a design tool. Might use obviously you would use sound, but it does allow you to free it up a little bit and take people out of the purely visual, which is also more inclusive as well. It's a more inclusive way to create.
Absolutely. So let's talk about you and your creative process, where you have to step above and beyond the normal experience to outdo the ordinary almost, and create a new immersive experience. And I'm sure a lot of the briefs that you get, the client is like, we want something that's never been done before, or
Yes.
that sort of thing. So do you notice now with all the experience you have that you have a certain way or a process where or do your ideas just come to you when you're doing something mundane once you've ingested the brief and what you've got to do?
I think that's what makes it so terrifying being a commercial artist, is that a brief comes in and there's a time limit on it. You have to come up with ideas by a certain amount of, by a deadline. And that's one of the bits I hate the most. But without that deadline, I also know I would never get anything done, which is why I'm not a fine artist. I couldn't be a fine artist. I do need a brief, but it is also one of the most horrible aspects of the job, because you have to be creative on demand, come up with an idea by next Saturday. And that, you can freeze in the headlights of that. So I find what I need to do, my process, if there is one, is that I am constantly surfing through culture and inspiration, looking for inspiration all the time, because I never know when I'm going to need to draw on it for a brief. So I will always be reading and looking at things and following things up, to the point where it can be quite distracting. But I suppose I find if I'm not on a particular brief, I use that time to do that, to sort of absorb like a sponge as much as I can. And then when a brief comes in, I'll read the brief, and then I'll need to almost forget about the brief for a couple of days and take a step back and let it percolate. So let all of, everything I've seen in the last 20 years and then pertinently, so that you're relevant, things that you've seen in the last 20 minutes, you let that develop in the background almost. So I need to have a bit of space where it's almost like what's happening in your peripheral vision. So I know when I'm being creative, I know something's happening. I'm not entirely sure what it is, but it's like when you see something in the corner of your eye. So it's seeing those things happening, and then you have to choose the right moment to then look at that thought directly and see if it turns into something useful. But that doesn't come by me directly looking at problem. I need to, I'm sure like most people, you get your ideas when you're doing something else. So walking the dog, on a bike ride. I cycle to work every day. So I have a 20-minute in and out of work, and I use that quite deliberately to not think about the brief. And often I'll arrive at work with an idea, or something will have sort of taken shape. But it is a bit hit and miss. You don't know if that's going to work. And so it is, it can be quite a pressurized environment. And that's why one thing I love about working within an agency is you have other people, so it's not a completely solo exercise. Certainly for me as a creative director, I want to get my teams thinking as well. So I want the lovely people I work with, the other creatives, to go off on that same path. So we will set them the task and hope that, our hive mind will develop something interesting. And, I think 99% of the time we do.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot in there. Okay, so first of all, there's the catalogue of your mind. And I know what you mean. You collect millions and millions of things. And sometimes that magic is when you put two of these odd things together as one, and then boom, something happens. And I want to talk to you a little bit about flow state and your bike ride, but I also want to talk to you about the other creatives on your team and you observing when they're at their best with creativity, and if it's a good measure of pressure, as you seem to thrive under pressure, and whether you find they've each got their own quirk, I suppose, of needing isolation, or just can sit straight down with a sketchbook or their laptop and they're doing it.
Yeah, I think it is the privilege of being a bit older, now a creative director, I get more time to think than my junior colleagues. You know, they will be pulled from pillar to post, put on project after project. So I think often for them, and this happened to me when I was younger as well, you know, as a junior, you tend to be put in a room, told to brainstorm with a group of people, and you've got to come up with an idea there and then. And that's sort of how I learned. You know, I was put in those situations over and over and over again as a younger creative, and never on my own. You know, you're usually with other people, so you know, ideas spark off each other, and you'll build on someone else's idea. And so obviously we do that now, but I think that environment has changed in the last, I definitely post-COVID, because we are all working a little bit more remotely. So we do have more time on our own now, even in a commercial setting. You know, you'll have probably a couple of days where you're working from home. So there's a bit more space, I think. And then we also I know, you know, the other CDs I work with, we all have slightly different methods of trying to get good work out of our team. And sometimes, so we have different methods. That we have one called walk and talk, where you will get on the phone with somebody, so not on a screen at all, and you'll phone each other and you'll both walk, and one person will just talk through an idea and the other person will listen. So it's almost like a creative therapy session.
I love that.
This is quite a nice way to develop an idea. So, and it works quite nicely, you know, when you have shyer people on the team. And a lot of really good creatives are naturally introverted and need a bit more space and aren't necessarily comfortable talking to the room. And it's those people that you need to design other ways of sharing their ideas. So that's quite a good way of doing it. And then I've got a few other methods where we'll do online brainstormings, where we'll read an idea together in silence, and then I'll break everyone off into groups of 2, and then those 2 people will then go and talk, because it can just be a slightly easier way of expressing an idea. I notice when I've got, say, 10 people in the room, there'll always be half of those who won't say anything, and it's not because they haven't got a good thought, it's just that they don't want to speak out. And then, you know, as we discussed, sometimes it's really hard to come up with an idea there and then on the spot. People need to go. I do. I mean, I know that. I find it really difficult if we're presenting with clients and they want an immediate opinion on something. I find that sometimes very difficult. If someone asks me directly the question, I go blank. And then you can find yourself just waffling or saying words. Words come out. I'll sometimes laugh with my team. You know, that words just came out and I don't know what I was saying. Hopefully they made sense. But yes, so you do need to be mindful of people's different ways of responding to a creative brief.
Yeah, love it. We were trying to label being in the zone the other day, and you had said, yeah, it's the flow state. So I did some research. The father of flow state is a Hungarian-American psychologist. He's since passed. It's Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, and I think he first coined the term flow state. There's a really great 2004 20-minute TED talk by him, and he's got some books, and I've put a link on the Sacred Mechanics website for it. But it's he has a PhD, had a PhD, and he interviewed a lot of creatives and studied other study papers where for actually decades this has been looked into, and we just don't hear about it much, about what composers and ballerinas and artists do to get that idea and that flow. And he said the nearest thing we can describe it in essence is that it's ecstasy that we're in when we're doing our best creative work. And the ecstasy in Greek, it's a Greek word, means to stand outside of yourself. And I just love that. It's almost you leave space and time, you leave all your concerns, and you're just doing, and your experience is intrinsic within yourself and it's just coming through. And I think where Mihai's work was going is just figuring out what happiness is. And that they'd found that most people that reported being pretty happy most of the time were practicing a flow state frequently. Yeah.
I think it's an interesting conundrum with the changes in how we are working now with AI coming through, which is making the actual delivery of design much quicker, and it's taking away the need to learn a skill. Because I think when you're a young creative, whether you're whatever it is, a designer or a musician or a dancer, less so with the physical creative spaces, but you tend to learn a craft. It's like learning to be a carpenter. I learned to become an animator, and I did hours and hours of, really menial, but repetitive work, repetitive drawing. If you're a young graphic designer learning to do packaging design, you might find yourself, or you would have found yourself doing days and days of tiny tweaks and revisions. And whilst it's feels boring, that's where you get into that flow state as a younger, when you start out, and it gives you those repetitive moments give you time to zone out a bit. It's that book, isn't it? The Art of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
It's equivalent.
Yeah, and just to add to that, with the flow state, I think Mihai says you need about 10 years experience to really get into it when you're doing your work, because there's this level of mastery where you can go into autopilot. But absolutely, during my training, pre-computer, I was drawing straight lines with a rotring pen and hand lettering. And then when I would order typography from the typesetter, I was using a surgical scalpel, and if there was a typo or something, I was cutting single letters and swapping them. But because I loved it and it was high concentration, that was a flow state. And it was so rewarding, although maybe to others such a menial thing. So that is being lost. But I wonder, with people choosing to enter the, I guess, corporate sort of commercial creative arts these days, whether they're artists in the first place and whether they'll always need that creative outlet using their flow, and that AI remains a tool. But one needs to maintain that pre-part of the tool application where you need the concept first. You can't surely press a button and there's going to be a good idea.
No, I think maybe where the danger there is that you will have people who are not creatives, not trained creatives or trained designers, who will be able to use the tools so quickly that they will not need to employ a professional artist or professional creative anymore. I think if you're naturally inclined towards creativity, you will always come at a problem from that angle, and you will always want your thinking to lead. And then, yes, you'll use AI as a tool, but we see it already. Clients, you can tell quite easily when a client's come to you and they've already used AI to sort of try and solve their own brief.
Yeah, it's frequent now.
Yeah, so at the moment, AI is still used as a tool, and it tends to be creatives. Well, certainly, it's infiltrating everything. But in our industry, it's the creative team who are using AI creatively and to great effect. It's worked really well. But anyway, I don't want to get pessimistic about it. We talk to our juniors about it a lot, and and how best to, we've told them all, you guys need to master these tools. Like, you need to be on top of it and be comfortable with it. And that's how you'll, I guess, keep working. I feel less that I need to do it now. I'm sort of coming towards the end of my career, which sounds really sad. My commercial career, not my creative career. I always have that.
Yes.
So it's really, yeah, I guess looking to that younger generation and trying to see with our experience how we can direct them to protect themselves, I suppose.
Pass the baton on, and you know what you can instill in them and what they don't need anymore. Which I want to scramble out of this AI trajectory. I want to talk about other stuff, you know it. So just as a gentle transition, what role does intuition play in your work as a creative director?
Intuition in my role of a creative director, I think it's probably huge for me. I think I follow my heart with a lot of projects and briefs, and I think I will instinctively know when something feels right and that we should go in that direction. And it is a form of intuition. I'll often get a little bubble of excitement when we're going through ideas and one feels right, and I will then frustrate the strategists on my team because they won't necessarily understand why
You just
why
know.
we've come up with that idea or why we're going down that route, but it will feel right. So I think it absolutely plays a huge role. But I do, it's an odd one, isn't it, in the commercial space, because everything needs to be quantifiable, measurable. Our clients talk about KPIs.
Yeah.
There's a clash there, isn't there?
Yeah, but do you think with clients, the ones you love, that intuition is sort of contagious once you know and they feel it and they see it, that they're signing on that dotted line and running. Anyway, I do love clients like that just see how an idea has lit up the creative team, and they're just like, oh yeah, this is going to be a good one, and you run and you do it. So
yeah,
the good ones, I guess, know that there is magic at play sometimes and that they should benefit because that's the stuff money can't really buy.
And I think one of the reasons I like working in the experiential space is that it is not as quantifiable. It's quite hard to measure. I've worked in branding as well, which is a similar thing. Like, how do you build brand love? It's like, how do you make a lovable person? It's not easy to quantify, and it is based on intuition, and it's very hard to measure. So a lot of it is around intuition, and I think that's where it's quite interesting. It's less measurable, so there's more room for intuition and more room for storytelling. So when you do work with clients, I think if you can bring them along, bring them into the excitement, and it depends on the client. Some are more susceptible to it or more excited by that than others. It really depends. And then you just have to tell you're creative in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, well, do you want to talk about some spirituality and magic?
Yeah, for sure. Let's do that.
Well, here's a simple question. Do you believe creativity itself is a spiritual force?
Oh, I suppose it is. I suppose it is. It comes from, I suppose, like spirituality, you can't see it. You can only feel it. Being a creative director, it's a bit of an odd title. It's, it's like being you're talking about intuition. It's like being a director of intuition or a director of spirit.
Have you ever felt creative directed by spirit then the other way around? Do you sometimes feel like you're getting a feed in?
I don't know. I don't know if I externalize it like that. I think it's more of a going inwards, and maybe that links more towards a Buddhist tradition rather than, say, a Christian position. I often look at those two, the two different types of religion, where you've got Christianity, which is very much about looking outwards towards and praying outwards to a God or to Jesus and asking them to direct you and give you help. It's an asking, and it's an externally directed religion, I think. Whereas something like Buddhism is more of an internal going inside and being still. And that is what creativity feels more like to me, that there are the answers internally if you are quiet enough to listen for it. So I don't necessarily feel that I will have an external force coming in or giving me ideas, although I might sometimes ask for it.
Yeah.
Ask some of my dead rellies and dead loved ones to help if I'm really stuck.
That's really beautiful.
But yes, I think it's more of an internally focused spirituality and creativity, and I think it does blend.
Yeah.
Spirituality it is similar to creativity, isn't it? It's sort of what you see on the peripheral vision. It's a feeling of something, and I guess everybody's something is slightly different, but I think my approach to spirituality and creativity is probably very much the same, which is being still and seeing what comes in.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really interesting. So with spirituality and that side of all of us, we're human beings. It's unavoidable that there's this essence in us that some of us can override, and some of us spend a lot of time trying to seek and find the kernel of truth. But how do you navigate honoring that, because you are a creative director, and not let the spirituality in a way seep into your professional life? Or do you let it? Like, how do you navigate it? I think I'll be on Sacred Mechanics talking to a lot of creatives about this. Are we entering an age where that kernel of truth, or that sense of spirituality and creativity being connected, is going to be a point of difference versus the machine? And is that something we should be leaning into and using professionally or not?
I think that's a really interesting question. I've not really thought about it before, but in the current climate, absolutely. I think it is that ability to think beyond the task in hand that will differentiate and bring that very broad, wide, I suppose, 360-degree view on a life into play, and to answer a single creative challenge, for example. I know I do try, and I think as I get older and I'm more confident in my own thinking and my own experience and what has worked well and what connects with people, so projects that I've worked on that have been successful, there usually is an element of deeper spiritual meaning, even if it's just small, that I've connected. And I will very, very rarely vocalize that to a client or anyone, but sometimes it will be there nonetheless. And those seem to be the projects that are more meaningful or touch a little bit more.
Yeah.
So perhaps that will be the way through for people. I don't know. It's a good question, though. Well, I don't know.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this. I believe it's time to harness and be free to speak about our humanness a bit more. You know, it's core, and especially if it's okay to be paid to be creative and spontaneously fulfill a brief with imagined outcomes, then surely we can spice it up with a little bit of spirituality in the way that it doesn't have to be obvious, but I'm sure a lot of creatives embrace the idea of meditation. It's quite palatable. It's like whatever's palatable in a corporate environment, but meditation is now being in touch with your feelings. All of these absolutely basic things we need have been in a capsule, and we've not been allowed to pull them out in the boardroom, but maybe working from home a bit more too, where we've got our own personal rituals, and maybe we're working in such a way that when we go to the office, it's a cold shock. So I know with my own practice in the last couple of years, I'd be in the office, get a brief, and then leave the building so I could work on it.
Yeah.
I can't sit at my desk now and be like, I'm not standing up till I have an idea. I have to satisfy that by fresh air, bird song, look at the sky, meditate, hold a crystal, whatever. It's just it's refining the ability to sort of go deeper into your personal well, which is full of all that catalogue you mentioned at the beginning of this conversation. There's millions of impressions and memories and
I think
ideas.
as well, there is to be a really effective creative, you're communicating to other humans. So you need to have that deep ability to empathize and truly put yourself in somebody else's space and try and work out what those points of connection are. And that is really something that only humans do. It's human to human, isn't it? So it's the ability to connect. And I think that's where experiential design is very interesting, because it goes beyond, trying to sell something. We're trying to sell something, but it's more subtle. And God, that makes me sound horrible, doesn't it? Like a
You want
dark
people to feel a certain way, right?
Yeah,
You are
you want
manipulating that a bit.
And it's a more subtle connection. And I think that ability to empathize, if you're doing creative work, there's so many different jobs. You can be a technician, you can design buildings, or you can design, you could be a typographer, you could be an animator, and you're literally doing your job, and then you're in your flow state, but it's not necessarily about connecting. But when you get to a certain position and you're thinking about, as a fine artist would do, it's those moments of connection, and that's where the successful work comes. And I think that probably is the way through.
Yeah.
The machine.
Yeah, well, it is human to human. That's exactly right. You've just taken that idea a step further. Yeah. Okay. Now, you sent me a fabulous book list. Thank you for that. And I hadn't read any bar a couple of them, so it was really interesting to dive into your library in that way. But anything like perceptions of UFOs and that sort of thing, and Georgery, I love this. I love it. And I love your expansiveness. And I totally appreciate that. I'm a bit like that. I'm all over the place. It's a really wide lens I've got. And I'm in no way narrow in my belief system. I'm just like this wide open child going, there's a UFO and what's this crystal doing? Sorry, my dog is running around here. Frankie. All the way from seeing people perform telekinesis through to psychic readings, and I love tarot, but then I also love the seriousness of some of the spiritual practices, like the serious end of Georgery. And then there's the spectacle of UFOs and people watching or chasing UFOs that I love as well, and speculating what that is. Yeah.
It's so interesting, isn't it? But that's why I put the Passport to Magonia on the list, which is written by Jacques Vallée. It's quite old now. I think it's 1969, but it's an absolutely fascinating read, because it pulls a lot of different areas together that I find really interesting, which is folklore and mythology with contemporary UFO sightings through to our consciousness. And that is a really good book that goes beyond the materialism of, say, the UFO phenomenon. And it looks at reports throughout the millennia from human beings about similar experiences and how they report it through their own cultural lens, and how very similar they are. When you strip back the cultural lenses, you see these consistent experiences of people. And now we talk about UFOs, for example, but it just makes you question what actually that phenomena is, and is there just a human condition that repeats and repeats and makes us see these things or experience these things? And then what are these things? Are they physical, or is it a manifestation of another dimension, for example? It's just so many fascinating stories, and that book brings it all together, and it's beautifully written. So I definitely recommend that.
Yeah.
Gives it more meaning, I think, because we can get caught up in. So I find the whole UFO phenomena fascinating, and I think, probably like a lot of people, I watched Close Encounters of the Third Kind when I was a kid, and that sort of blew my mind, and it still blows my mind. It's one of my favorite films, all of it. I mean, it's such a beautifully filmed, the soundtrack, there's so many images in it that stick in your head, you know, from the car being lit up from above by the UFO, which, by the way, I have used in a project. I've used that visual as a reference piece, to the little boy climbing out through the door with a light coming through, this sort of lights coming through the window of the kitchen. And then that mountain, the Devil's Mountain, and then everybody in the film sort of creating this mountain, this shape. So there's so many amazing motifs in that really got me thinking. Then there was E.T., wasn't there? I'm a child of my time. There was E.T.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I'm right there with you.
Became
and X-Files.
X-Files, exactly. So our generation clearly all obsessed with the UFO phenomena. And I still find it really interesting. And there's so much going on in that space, and no one knows what it is. It's just a big mystery, isn't it? It's something that's never ending. You can keep exploring it, and no one can answer it. So it's an open question. And I think that's why it appeals. You know, there's a mystery there.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone will ever answer, and it makes the world feel more magical and asks some of the biggest questions. Why are we here? Is there anyone else there? And I love that. I love meditating on those questions. You know, those sorts of questions, I find I can sit and just lie and think about it. Passport to Magonia brings that in and brings in a more folkloric element, which is also interesting. It links, for example, you know, Celtic stories of people being abducted by fairies, the Fae. Descriptions are very similar to current UFO abduction stories, and they go back through time. So it seems to be part of our human condition to look outwards and see external forces, extraterrestrial or extra human supernatural forces that are influencing us in some way. And what does it mean?
That's so fascinating that you bring that up. Just circling back to that TED talk I mentioned by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, he talks of this. People in certain villages, I think through Europe from memory, recounting experiences of seeing UFOs and so on, but also that mix of local folklore and trying to unearth where these stories came from and why, and at what point in history the people telling the stories were. But can I ask, have you had any encounters yourself?
No, I haven't, and I am still waiting. I haven't. And then sometimes I think maybe I have and I've forgotten about it, and that's why I'm so fascinated by it. But no, I haven't. Have you?
Oh, yeah.
I'm jealous.
I've had so much weird stuff happen to me. It's why I'm in this chair. I think it's just therapeutic, me talking to other people about it. Yeah, I've had a lot of experiences, and I'm no wiser than just reading a book about it. I will comment, though, on one thing, one very lucid experience I had, and I happened to be in the UK, in Cornwall. And I was visiting a friend's family farm, and we're standing out in one of the fields, and there was this silver, like classic flying saucer.
Oh, wow.
And it wasn't that far away, and we're all standing there watching it. And after about 15 minutes, everyone else said, "Oh, I'm bored with this. I'm going inside."
Oh, wow.
And I was like, wow. I'm staying. It hovered for 40 minutes. It was on the news that night.
Oh, wow.
Others had seen it. Something happened. But what's really funny is what struck me was not that there was a flying saucer, but there was a point where everyone sort of shut down and got bored and left the scene.
Yeah.
Whether that was some sort of bigger mind control thing, or it just we peak out as this isn't real and goodbye. I'm not sure.
There's another one of my favourite books, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And do you remember at the beginning of that book, is it Zaphod Beeblebrox? They land their UFO in the middle of the town. I think they maybe land it in the middle of London, but they put a cloak of invisibility on it. And I'm trying to remember how they describe it, but it's essentially that. It makes people who walk past it look at it and go, "Oh, that's boring," and they just walk on.
Yeah,
I wonder whether
right.
that's almost like a
There's
sort of there comes a point where the human brain just switches off and, yeah, okay, it's not doing anything, nothing to see here.
Yeah, if there's, I'm sure there's evidence of this that I can't pull up out of my mental catalogue right now, where some things are so unexpected or not natural that we don't see it, or we just shut it down or ignore it and just keep walking. Anyway, I had experienced that firsthand, so it wasn't just, it's just the human nature. And then as a spiritual practitioner, I think you have to be open to seeing things, unless you need to be shocked for some reason and see something. But basically it's controllable, and I view it as a bit of a faucet where you can work on yourself to see all sorts of things, or you can shut down and see nothing. And life is much easier if you see nothing. Believe me. You speak to any psychic medium, it's really hard going. You walking up the street and there's people that are sort of alive and walking, and then there's everyone else. So it's a way of life that you can either adjust to or you don't.
Did you ever ask your friends why they stopped looking, or why they went inside, or what made them?
No, well, some were the friends' parents, so I didn't sort of bail them up. I had just met them. But my friend got irritated that I kept asking why. It sort of bugged them. So I didn't. I just dropped it. Strange, isn't it?
Really strange.
Yeah, but yes, that's not my only experience, but that's not what we'll talk about today. But I've had lots of other things all through my life that are absolutely unexplainable, and sometimes just maybe terrifying because you don't know what it is, and other things are just you're not sure if that was real or not. But I think given the nature of reality, and it's what's so exciting for me now is where science is heading with quantum mechanics and things like that, where it helps us put a handle on things and different parallel universes, and just the way things are strung together is cool. I think it gives a lot of scope, and it's led me to think about creativity too. I've been listening to some quite in-depth podcast interviews with scientists about creativity and ideas and the field, and are our brains incredible antennas, and we pull stuff in as we need, including memories and thoughts and concepts. And we don't know, but I love this openness to play with ideas.
I think the other book worth looking at, if you haven't, is the theory of biocentrism, which is very much around that, and comes out of a foundational knowledge of quantum physics. But in a nutshell, it talks about how nothing exists until you observe it. So nothing is in existence. It is only the observer that creates reality. And the book goes into this in a lot of depth, and it's quite hard to grasp at times, but it's such a fascinating concept, which I think is the ultimate truth. And I think it explains so many things of how our world works and why we're even here. But it's really interesting. And I think, when you link that to creativity, it's the same thing. It's that by observing something in your mind, you bring it into creation, you formulate it, you manifest it. It's the same process. I think that's why I find that book fascinating. and it links all of these ideas together. So UFOs, for example, it's the act of observing them that brings them into creation. So I think it's very complicated and simple at the same time. But if it's in the eye of the observer, as you're saying, it's about your personal receptivity to these things, which then makes them appear. It doesn't make them any less real. Or where it becomes interesting is when more than one people see these things, you know, so you have a objectifiably real thing. What does that mean? But that book starts to explain how that can happen. And I think it's a really interesting approach to understanding consciousness and creativity. It's a really, really interesting read. I love that book.
I love that. The last 6 to 12 months, I've really become interested in these books that sort of head into the scientific, which I haven't done before, and I would describe myself as not very scientifically or mathematically minded in any way. But I'm really drawn to these books, and there's a lot of publications out now that break it down for a non-scientist, and it's probably that next level for seekers to try and understand the nature of our reality and consciousness. And actually, I just want to tell you about one thing that is this book that I went to. How do I say this? I got it in Scotland, but it was in a research library, and it was the only copy. It's the only copy on earth that we know of, and it's not on the internet or anything, and it's called The Eternal News.
Oh, wow.
The Eternal News by J.J. Brown. So I was doing some research. I was reading The Secret again, and I wanted to remember where Rhonda Byrne had gotten her idea, and it was from a book called The Science of Getting Rich by Wallace Wattles. And I was like, yeah, so where did he get the idea? And I was reading the front matter of that book, and he notes and thanks J.J. Brown and The Eternal News. So I'm like, I'm going to find this book, and I get online and it's nowhere. There's one copy on the, Global University database, and it's 16,000 kilometres from me in Edinburgh.
Oh, wow.
So I went and I made an appointment with the book, and I retyped in the whole thing, and I republished it, so it's for sale on Amazon now. But in that, I read it and read it and read it, and it's 1889, and it's highly religious and spiritual, but I think it's written by a chemist. It's not someone's real name, and I just tried to figure out who it was, and it's in the front matter of the book. I've made some notes, but they were close to something. And, they were about to split the atom, and what this author was trying to figure out is we know that everything's made up of tiny atoms and molecules, and there's particles and nothing touches, but what's holding it together? What's the consciousness of it? And that's the premise of the whole book. So I'm just fascinated right now. That's where I'm at with this sort of thing.
It is fascinating, isn't it, when you start to dig into the mechanics of consciousness and how science approach it, and it quite quickly becomes, very spiritual. Quantum physics veers into that space, doesn't it? So I think it's amazing. You have this sort of full circle almost, where spirituality and science meet. They meet somewhere, and that's the interesting bit, I think. I find it interesting. I read so broadly. I love doing that, following my nose and going from one topic to the next, and you go down rabbit holes, and it's that breadth of reading. I know you maybe don't get into detail on any particular subject, but I love having that broad knowledge that that allows your synapses to work and connect and make these connections between big ideas. And I think that is really healthy for my creativity. That's what I need to do for my creativity. When you're coming up with ideas, it's the ability to link random concepts and ideas, tie things together. And I think maybe that is part of my practice, actually, is having that very, very broad curiosity about the world and how it works, and looking at things from as many different angles as possible, and looking back in time. I think I'm fascinated by the ancient past and our ancestors, how they looked at the world. You know, what have they got to teach us? But trying to look at things from as many different angles, I find very useful. Keeps my brain going.
It's wonderful. And when we talk about the ancients and we start looking at their graphic design and their symbols and their concept of shapes, and I guess that grasp of sacred geometry that we're still studying now, and the math alone that I don't understand, but wow.
Oh my God, yeah.
It does full circle back, doesn't it? What you've just said sort of circles back to the beginning of the conversation and how things piece together. And I think as creatives, human to human, we ancestrally can feel the gravitas or the gravity of some of this, and we can't quite articulate or put our finger on, but we do pull in some of these concepts into our work, and it does touch other people, our audience, in some way. There's a knowing, and there is no prompt for that.
There is not. There is not.
Well, I've got a question.
Yeah, go on.
Might not be easy for you to answer, but what's one piece of creative or spiritual advice you wish you had 10 years ago or further, in your past?
Spiritual advice, creative advice. I think I didn't come from a religious background. I didn't have any particular religious input as a child. From that point of view, it was very functional. I was at a C of E school in England, and then in Canada, it was very secular. My schooling and my family weren't religious or spiritual, to be honest with you. I really came to it through grief and loss. I lost my stepfather when I was very young. He was only 30, and that set me to thinking about what happens after we're gone, which is a very basic way into spirituality, because it, through loss and grief, you start to question. And I couldn't bear the thought of there not being something else. I found that very difficult. I found it difficult, but I also found it incomprehensible. It didn't make sense that there was no other place. And that led me on a path of self-discovery, I think. I never really had anyone telling me what to think or how to do it. I didn't have any specific advice that I trusted, really, or that I would have actioned. And then it was probably, I'd lost my husband when I was 39, and that sort of kick-started me into another world of exploration into the spiritual. I'd already started moving in that direction anyway, but that definitely, I suppose, supercharged my thinking. We went through a year with terminal illness, so we had time to think about, well, he wasn't spiritual. He wasn't really interested. He'd grown up with a very religious family, so was not interested at all. Didn't really want to investigate it, but I found it very helpful. And I, at that point, was so open to all spiritual advice. I literally sort of opened the doors and said, right, everybody come in, give me advice, tell me what I should do, what's happening, why are we going through this? And I made lots of friends doing that. I met with a local Christian group. I made a lovely friend, a really nice woman called Liz, who was incredible. she taught me, or she was a born again Christian, so she taught me about her practice from that lens, which was at times useful and at times not so much, because I felt it was a little bit tinged with a desire to draw me into a realm that I wasn't, a gang, basically. It felt like they wanted me in their gang. I didn't quite like that. But I then also started investigating Buddhism at that time because someone gave me the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, which is an absolutely incredible book and is now one of the go-to books in hospices. You know, it's a really useful to read if you're looking after people at end of life. And there was there's some amazing tips in there, spiritual tips on how to approach life and how to approach dying and how to blend the two together, which I have found incredibly useful. So the teachings in that book have been very helpful, I think. So not necessarily having a tip or a specific piece of advice or guidance, but I think just appreciating existence and how it manifests and how not to have attachments, really. So not to attach to people, places, things. That's what I keep at the back of my mind. You know, when work goes wrong or creative ideas are rejected or you have a difficult, you know, it's a very difficult thing being a creative. I know people laugh about it sometimes as a job. You know, it's not difficult like being a teacher or being a nurse, but as a creative, professional creative, or a fine artist or a musician or an actor, you are constantly bearing your soul, aren't you? You're constantly opening up your thought patterns for other people to critique and comment on.
Yeah.
So you are always in a position of vulnerability. So you are always in a position of being very, very human. And I think to cope with that, you need to not develop a thick skin, because I don't think that's the answer, but to develop quite a Buddhist attitude to life, which is to not become attached to anything, to any idea, and to be open to let things come and go, and to not let things ruffle your feathers. So I think it's that spiritual practice that I find the most useful in my day-to-day life as a creative person, because without that I would be up and down every day, all day, every day, and I don't think I could do my job.
That's a really profound reflection, Lisa. Thank you. That's, you're right on every level, and especially this idea of impermanence and detachment.
Yes.
Yeah. Let me just pull open my chest and bare my soul and give you these ideas that are based on childhood memories and seen it from ET. And the work environment we're in will probably crush it. And we have to keep smiling and just say, no worries, here, I'll just open my chest and give you another one. I've got these nonstop. I'm like a vending machine.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. It is, isn't it? You just, you have to keep giving and not get upset. I mean, that can crush you. And that's, I think, for people who are empathetic and naturally creative and often quite introverted, it is the most oddest career to go into. And I think, we talk about women particularly leaving the industry, and maybe that's one of the core reasons that once they get into that space, where your empathetic skills are absolutely necessary to do a good job, but they are also the reasons why it is then very difficult to cope with that role that makes you step out of it. So I'm sure this applies to other careers as well, but I've never done other careers, so I wouldn't know for sure. But I think it's that strange, it's a very odd contrast of the skills you need to do the job well versus the reality of doing the job well. And so, yes, I would urge everyone to get a little bit Buddhist, get a little bit of Buddhism into their practice. in order to succeed and thrive and not drown under the constant feedback that you get, constant opening of your heart and ideas.
And I think that's excellent advice. And the Dalai Lama will agree. Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Okay, I think that's a really nice note to leave this on. But I wanted to do one fun thing, which is a bit out of context of everything we spoke about, but I didn't know what we're going to talk about. But I have this tarot deck. It's called the Druid Craft Tarot. I've designed my own tarot deck called the Sea Witch Tarot, but this Druid Craft Tarot, I've had it for over 20 years. And you had shown me a strong interest in Druidry, and I love it too. I haven't really looked into it for some time, but my library says otherwise, and I used to be a bit obsessed about a decade ago. But I'm going to pull a card for you for your day.
Actually, a decade ago.
And it's just such beautiful imagery. Oh, look at you, the Queen of Swords.
Oh, wow.
You go get them. It's the...
Thank you, Belle.
The very sharp mind you have.
Thank you.
It's the intellect. And you are a queen.
Well, I do my best.
Yeah.
Thank you, Belle.
Oh, thank you, Lisa. Thanks so much.
Yeah, it's a fascinating.
Have a beautiful day.
Fascinating conversation. I've really enjoyed it. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Sacred Mechanics Podcast. I'm Belle Bear. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and stay up to date with us on social media or at sacredmechanics.com.